Ecclesiastes chapter 7, and also a reminder, on November 24th, we will have our regular services, Sunday school in the morning. Then we'll take a break and gather back together here at 4 o'clock and have our poultry and praise service. And so you'll be able to go home, catch a quick nap. And if the Patriots are on, you want to watch the Patriots at, I don't know, if they play at 1 o'clock, you can watch that and then be back just for a time of praise and fellowship together as we gather together downstairs. All right, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, and we are right in the middle of the book as Koheleth, or Solomon, is moving us from a search for meaning in life to advice and commentary about the future. Two basic questions that we find at the end of chapter 6 and in the middle of chapter 7 are: who knows what is good for a man, and who can make straight that which is made crooked? And they're like two sides of a hinge that swings a door from the first half to the second half of the book. And the pin that holds those hinges together is found in the first 14 verses of chapter 7. And in these verses, Solomon turns our minds to how we face the adversity that exists within a broken world. Do we seek to escape the adversity, or do we seek to embrace God and learn in the time of adversity? You see, the temptation in our brokenness is to escape when adversity comes. But if we are living life under the sun, S-O-N, we will embrace our great God and learn within our adversity. Now, we're reminded in verse 3 that sober reflections are good for the heart. In other words, it's better to face adversity with sober reflection and to have joy than to seek escape through mirth. There are 3 different learning experiences that Solomon observes. Last week, we looked at learning from death. This week, we're going to look at some learning from wisdom and learning from warning. And so, as we looked at that first better than section in those first 5 verses in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, they're better than proverbs that we looked at. And they drew out lessons from death. And death is serious. It sobers us. But Solomon is not promoting a life with no hope or even pleasure. He simply turned us to look at death so that we can learn to live and enjoy life now by turning to God. And so the overarching lesson in those first 4 verses is recognize that every funeral anticipates our own. You learn to live in the present by looking to death's visitation of others. So we saw that a good name is better than good perfume. Reflecting on life in hindsight is the lesson that we learn. And in what way can I live so that my name will be remembered and turn hearts to God? We learned in verse 1 as well, the day of death is better than the day of birth. We need to recognize that the end of the life is more important than the beginning. How can I steward my life to maximize its fulfillment at death? Verse 3, we learned that sorrow is better than laughter. And again, that we recognize that our disappointments are often God's appointments. So do I handle adversity looking to God or trying to escape? And so let's look at the next set of lessons this morning. And Solomon is turning us to some more better than Proverbs as he teaches some lessons from wisdom. And there's certainly a wrong and a right path to choose when we face adversity. And we know from our learning that the best path embraces and clings to our great and sovereign God when adversity comes. Choosing escape can lead us to very shaky ground. So we're looking at lessons from wisdom this morning, and choosing the right path is important. Remember as a kid and playing capture the flag at my grandfather's house. We would do that sometimes at night in the dark, and his property was 20 or so acres, and he had a pond that used to be an old not a gravel, but a stone quarry. And there were cliffs that surrounded it, 20-foot high cliffs that surrounded the pond. And one night we were playing, and I knew that place. I grew up there. I lived the first 5 years of my life there, and then was there many, many times growing up, almost every week of the year. And so I knew the layout well, but we had snuck behind enemy lines to get the flag, and we were found out, and we took off and began to run. And I knew that the pond was on the right side of me and the cliffs, and I knew that a lot of space was on the left side of me. And emotions were high, right? You know, you get in a place like that, you're a kid, especially at night, you get ambushed, the enemy's after you, and you are just running for dear life, and you don't want to get captured. And as I was running, there was a tree in front of me, and I knew that I was close to the pond, but I just reacted. I saw the tree, and instead of going left, I went right. And right on the other side of that tree was the ledge. And it was just like Wile E. Coyote. You know, remember when he ran off the cliff and everything would stop? And he's just standing in the midair, and he kind of feels around and realizes there's nothing under him, and then he drops. It was like it took that much time. And now I'm dropping and grabbing and clawing. But what happened when the pressure was on, when emotions were high, and I had a decision to make, I let my emotion take over, and I made a bad choice. And so Solomon is now looking to wisdom in this portion, and how we're going to face adversity as we learn lessons from wisdom. So look at verses 5 and 6 with me, and we'll see the first of those lessons, and that is that rebuke is better than refrain or song. Look at them with me. Better is it, wrong chapter. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. The idea of this rebuke is strong admonition. And the truth is this, beloved, even in times of adversity, we may need this. Sometimes a strong admonition may be what brings good adversity. And so Solomon is even though it feels like and seems like a negative thing, he's taking something like rebuke, and he's teaching us that it can be good. I want you to notice where the rebuke is coming from. You see it there in verse 5. The rebuke of who? The wise. It's the idea of one who is skilled or experienced, a wise teacher. And Solomon certainly understood this. In Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 16, he says, "A wise man feareth and departeth from evil, but the fool rageth and is confident." Proverbs chapter 22, "A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished." Now, this doesn't mean that we should only seek or give rebuke, or that we should pay attention to every rebuke. Sometimes things are best left said once. Sometimes things are best left unsaid. Sometimes rebuke isn't the right path at all. But remember, this is a proverb, and Solomon is trying to make us think here. And that means that we need to be discerning of not only the path that we follow, but who we take it with. You see, Proverbs 22 goes on to say, by humility and the fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life. So we need to be humble listeners when it comes to rebuke, but we must also be skilled, humble givers. And so we must be careful of the advice that we give. But we also need to be careful of the advice that we take. When I worked in North Carolina in the machine shop, one of the things that was on every blueprint when it would go to the machine shop before that part would specifically come to the assembly area were tolerances. And tolerances simply mean this: when you're making a shaft, the shaft has to be this specific diameter, and it can't go outside of this diameter or under this diameter. It needs to be within that specific measurement. And so the engineers, they knew what the diameters need to be, and they also knew the information about the bearings that would go on the shafts. They understood what the tolerances of the shafts were. They understood how much pressure they could take and what they would be subject to. And so if the guy in the assembly area gets the shaft and he begins to press that bearing onto the shaft, and he doesn't like how it fits, but it's within the tolerance, within the specs, he can't go over to the guy in the machine shop and say, I want to change this. I just don't like how it fits. It doesn't feel good. Now, you can check it. But the guy in assembly doesn't know all that the engineer knows about both the shaft and the bearing. And so too tight would warp the bearings. Too loose, and it would turn inside the bearing rather than turn on the bearing. Now, it doesn't mean that the assemblyman didn't mean well, or that he wasn't good at his job. It didn't mean that the machinist didn't mean well or wasn't good at his job. It simply means that there was the engineer who was wise and knew what needed to be done. And so we need to be careful about advice that we give and advice that we take. Rebuke is a good thing, but it needs to come from a good counselor. We also see this word, fool, in the verse. And the idea of that is someone who lacks understanding. And so we see Solomon refer to the fool all throughout Proverbs. And the fact that the fool doesn't really give thought to what he says or what he knows. We also see the idea of a counselor, or one who gives advice or praise or rebuke, all throughout the book of Job. You remember Job's friends? We put those in quotes, I think. You know, Job, as he is going through difficulty in life, he's facing adversity. And along comes his friends. In verse 3, they expound all of their knowledge, and then along comes the fourth, and he expounds his knowledge. But in Job chapter 13 and verse 4, what do we find Job saying about his friends? Do you remember? He said, "You are all physicians of no value." Did they have good intentions? Absolutely. Were they trying to help Job? Absolutely. But what they were saying was turning into the song of fools. Why? Because they didn't have a full grasp of what was going on. They didn't understand well what was going on. And so as we consider this, rebuke and refrain, it is important that we understand the necessity of rebuke and that we have to be careful about the song or the laughter that comes into our lives. We see here in verse 6, look at verse 6 with me. It says, "For the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This is also vanity." It's interesting that Solomon compares it this way, and we can read through the book of Job, and we can see a lot of things that might be true that Job's friends say. There are things that might make us want to ponder, but because they have a lack of understanding with what they are dealing, it's like this laughter of fools. And what is the picture that Solomon's giving? I always loved it, and maybe some of you are people who love to watch flames and fire, and it's beautiful. It's nice to go to sleep to. I remember having a fireplace when I grew up, and we would put a fire in there in the winter, and I would just lay there and just doze off to sleep in the evenings. But when you build a fire, you get something that is called kindling, right? To start it off. And why do we use kindling? Because it's dry and it's light, it's easy to burn and kind of gets the fire ablaze. And what would it look like if we simply built a fire with kindling? Boy, there'd be a lot of light, a lot of flash, right? You know, the thorns that Solomon is referring to is just an empty weed. There's nothing more there than just something to kind of get a fire going. And boy, when you throw it in the fire, it flashes up. It looks great. It sheds great light, but it doesn't have the endurance to give you the sustenance from the meal that you need, right? To cook it. And so as we consider life, as we consider adversity, choose your counselors well. Choose them well. A good counselor gives you good and right counsel and doesn't just mean well. And so what do we learn? Choose your counselors well. It may only be one or two. It may be just a couple of people that you have in your life who can speak truth into your life. They understand the advice and the counsel that you need. But choose them well. They can bring good in adversity, not just mean well in adversity. Look at the second illustration that he gives us in verses 7 and 8. It says, "Surely oppression maketh a wise man, and a gift, or man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit." And so now we see Solomon comparing patience is better than pride. And he opens with an illustration of adversity. Oppression, he says, can drive a wise man to foolishness. You ever thought about that? You're in a very difficult situation, and what happens? The emotions begin to stir, things begin to happen quickly. You feel that pressure bearing down. He goes on to say a bribe causes the heart to perish, or it could be put this way: corruption destroys the understanding of the heart. And so the temptation at the start of adversity, when everything explodes and it's bearing down on you, is to escape, right? That's our human nature. Get me out. Emotions running high. Take the path of least resistance. Find the easy way out. And you may be in that situation tempted to compromise your integrity, your biblical values, friendships, family, or other precious things. You see, we can't always see or know the consequences of our compromises. Many times we think in adversity that we have control of our circumstance. And that if I can insert my hands and my reasoning and myself into it, then I'm going to make it better. But remember, oppression can drive a wise man to foolishness, as Solomon has just taught us. When we do that, we find ourselves many times living as a fool and lacking understanding. I want you to look at this phrase. You see it there, proud in spirit. See it there at the end of verse 8. It's the idea of self-exalting or haughty. And sometimes we can come into a situation and we try to come to our own defense or our own self-preservation. What begins, really many times what stirs that? Heart pride. Sometimes I just want to be right. I've got to be the right one. You ever been in that? Maybe in a very kind and loving discussion with your spouse, and one of you has to be the right one. Or maybe I've just got to defend. We have to be careful. What is beginning to stir within our heart? Is it a heart of pride? Is it a heart of not wanting to recognize that I made a poor decision, bad choice? See, pride can come into our heart, and boy, we can jump the gun. We can say things that we never intended to say, do things that we never intended to do. And so now, at the beginning of verse 8, Solomon makes another better than observation. You see it there? Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. This observation reminds us of a couple of things. I want you to think about it. First, it reminds us of this: the pressure release at the end of adversity typically feels better than when adversity starts. You ever thought about that? The pressure release at the end of adversity typically feels better than when adversity starts. I mean, boy, when everything just comes to a head and it bursts, it is no fun to be in that place. It's no fun to be in the midst of that kind of pressure. And Solomon is reminding us, be patient. Adversity will come to an end. Remember, chapter 3 and verse 11, right? He hath made everything beautiful in His time. We also need to learn this, and that is hindsight many times is 20/20, or at least more clear than at the beginning. Boy, you get in the midst of a conflict, you get in the midst of adversity, and you're trying to figure everything out. It's just happened, and I mean, it's like taking a 1,000-piece puzzle that was all together in a wonderful and beautiful picture and just throwing it up in the air and letting all the pieces fall and then trying to put them back together. And boy, you get to the end of putting that puzzle back together, and sometimes you look at it and say, man, why was this so hard at the start of it? Why? Because many times hindsight is 20/20. And the truth is this, beloved, we can learn much more if we will patiently walk through adversity. And so now let's look at verses 9 and 10, because here we find two lessons from warnings that help us in adversity, and they kind of touch on this. Look at verse 9 and 10. Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. Say not thou, what is the cause? That the former days were better than these. For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. So what do we find in these lessons from warning that Solomon is kind of giving us in the midst of patience is better than pride? Well, number one, don't give anger a foothold. Don't give anger a foothold. Solomon understood this. He wrote in the Proverbs, he that is soon angry dealeth foolishly, and a man of wicked devices is hated. He says, a fool uttereth all his mind. And the idea of that, the picture of that, is that anger coming out and just spewing all over the place. But a wise man keepeth it in until afterwards. You see, the fallout of an untempered anger can make any situation worse. Its explosive nature carries the same mental and emotional and spiritual fallout as a bomb exploding. Once it happens, the damage is done and can't be reeled back in. And so we need to be sure that we take some wisdom from James, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. In other words, do not react. Patiently respond. Patiently respond. The truth is this, beloved. Anger is an indicator of our maturity level. It's an indicator of our maturity level. How we handle it. Boy, when it comes out, when we are quick to anger, we need to check up. And look at where our heart is. Look at where we are in our spiritual maturity. I mean, perhaps we've all seen it, and if you have kids, we've all been there, where we react when we should respond, and it always makes the situation better with our kids, right? I mean, it's bad enough if there's one immature person in the conflict. Far worse when there are two immature people in the conflict. And Solomon says, listen, in adversity, when it comes to your patience or your pride, don't give anger a foothold. Many times, beloved, our anger can be attached to our pride levels. When we're struggling in pride, that anger makes its way out. But look at what else he says in the following verse. Say not thou, what is the cause? That the former days were better than these. What is he saying? Don't let nostalgia blind you. You know, sometimes when we get into adversity, we get into difficult times, we pine for better days and better places. Oh, it was so much better in the good old days. It was so much better when I was here instead of there. It was so much better. Things were just easier and no, no. Pining for better days makes nothing in the present better. You ever thought about that? I mean, I know we talk about it. 30 or 40 years ago in our country, we saw a different country, didn't we? Is it going to do us any good, beloved, to pine for the good old days? Not that we shouldn't want right, not that we shouldn't want to see good things in our country or even in our lives. But is it going to do us any good? Is it going to make anything better to pine for those times and those days? No, it's not going to change anything. And many times, the further back our mind goes in the past, it is the more fond memories that endure. Have you ever noticed that? Now, the truth is this: looking back it's a part of true perspective. Isaiah tells the people in Isaiah 46, remember this and show yourselves men. Bring it again to mind, O ye transgressors. Remember the former things of old. It is good for us to look back and to evaluate, but we must not dwell on the past and make unhealthy and unwise comparisons between present circumstances and past events. I want you to see this. Turn to Psalm 42 with me. I want you to see what the psalmist is writing here because it's good stuff. Psalm 42. And we'll look at verses 4 and 5. Psalm 42, verses 4 and 5. Psalmist says this: when I remember these things, I pour out my soul in me. For I had gone with the multitude. I went with them to the house of God with the voice of joy and praise, with a multitude that kept holy day. Oh man, what a wonderful, wonderful memory that is in mind of this psalmist. He's remembering those past days. His walk with God seems so much better. But notice in verse 5 at the beginning, what does he say? Why art thou cast down, O my soul? You see, nostalgia can feel good. But when we give it control, we can find ourselves in dissatisfaction and depression. I mean, boy, I was out walking. I can't even remember where I was the other day, but I saw one of those old metal yellow Tonka dump trucks. Did anybody have one of those? I mean, not the plastic ones, the metal ones. Those were awesome. And I saw that, and boy, as soon as I saw it, my mind went back to the day that I opened that, Christmas Day. I don't even know what year, but I can remember seeing it and just being excited. And nostalgia feels good, doesn't it? But we can't give it control. What is the psalmist's solution? Hopefully you stayed there and didn't turn back. Why art thou cast down, O my soul? Why art thou disquieted in me? What does he say? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him for the help of his countenance. Don't dwell on past blessings other than to give thanks to God or to remind ourselves of his providential care. Beloved, thank the Lord for the good old days. But the good old days are past and we're in the now. And we have a responsibility to deal with the now. And rather than escaping adversity, beloved, we need to hope in God. Winter, in his Ecclesiastes commentary, states it this way: to live in nostalgia is to blind ourselves to what God is doing in our lives at this present moment. It is far easier for us to look back and see what God has done than to detect his purpose in our present circumstances. So, beloved, as adversity comes, and as easy as it is and as tempting as it is to go back to better days, we must be cautious because it can blind us to what God is doing in the present. And so what can we learn from this? Look back at verse 8 with me. I want you to underline the phrase, patient in spirit. You see that phrase there? The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. The idea of that is long-suffering. It's a picture of the plodder. Step by step, moment by moment, the plodder. It refers to our feelings and our spirit when facing adversity. But it's interesting because in nature, it is used in description of the pinions. You know what the pinions are? They're the longest feathers on the bird's wings. They're the flight feathers. You see, patience is not dependent upon our own strength. Patience is dependent upon God's strength. You ever watched an eagle soar? It's incredible to see them in flight. It's incredible to see them at the highest heights of the mountains where they place their nests, and to watch them circle and to fly in windy and difficult situations. And the strength that they have and the agility that they have is incredible. And that is because of their pinions. It's even incredible as you watch them when they take their young and they're teaching their young to fly, how they're teaching them to sustain and to use the pinions, their flight feathers, for that sustaining and agile flight. And they'll come alongside and kind of help and bear them up as they're doing it. Boy, as I began to think about that, my mind immediately went to Isaiah. Do you remember the passage where he says, "Hast thou not known? Hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary? There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." What is Solomon teaching us in this? Patiently walk with God in adversity. Patiently walk with God in adversity. Listen, you may be in a place where you feel that you don't know what to do. The pressure is coming down on you. It's hard to see the path ahead. But beloved, remember, God's design in adversity is to bring us to Him. We need to ask ourselves, am I trying to escape my adversity, or am I embracing God in my adversity? How am I doing in my daily walk with Him? And these are important questions, beloved, because when life's pressures come down, that adversity starts hitting us. We begin to question. We begin to struggle. We need to ask ourselves, how am I doing in my walk with Him? That's where this begins. Am I doing the things that I know are right? The things that I know that I ought to be doing? Are there things that I should be doing, but I'm justifying not doing them? You see, beloved, the strength in the walk with God comes from and adversity comes from our walk with Him, whether we're in adversity or not in adversity. And in those days of blessing, or in those days where we enjoy the mountaintop experiences, those days where we just can enjoy a rest in God, beloved, we need to be walking with Him. Why? Because adversity is going to come. It's going to come. And if we're not walking with Him now, if we're not doing the things that we ought to be doing now, far more difficult to come to that place when we face adversity. Remember, James says this, draw nigh to God, and He will draw nigh to you. Listen, if there are things that you need to get right with God, get them right so that you can walk with Him, so that you can cling to Him. His opinions are perfect and omnipotent. And then I want you to see this final wisdom better than, and we find it in verses 11 and 12. It says, wisdom is good with an inheritance, and by it there is profit to them that see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, and money is a defense, but the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. Here Solomon draws our attention once again to wealth. We see it many times throughout the book, and he compares it to wisdom. And I want us to understand, he's not condemning wealth here, but he does uphold wisdom as better. I love what Solomon says in chapter 4 of Proverbs. He says, wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And with all thy getting, get understanding. Sometimes the Hebrew of Ecclesiastes is difficult to understand and decipher. And sometimes you get into a place where people look at it and they say, well, it should be this way, or maybe it should be this way. And so we see this opening phrase, wisdom is good with an inheritance. And that could be wisdom accompanied by inheritance. It could even state this, wisdom is as good as an inheritance. But either way, both are profitable and neither is condemned. And so those who do not see an untimely death can enjoy the profit of wealth as one of God's blessings. Maybe God has chosen to bless you financially. Enjoy it. Solomon's not saying sell all you have and get rid of it and live in poverty. But combined with wisdom, we can steward that wealth in a way that we can enjoy it and honor God with our substance. Now, I want you to notice here that Solomon is comparing them in the face of adversity. You see that there in verse 12? For wisdom is a defense and money is a defense. The idea of defense in a literal sense is protection from the sun, just like we see in Jonah. You remember Jonah in the gourd? God raised the gourd up and Jonah was protected by the leaves of the gourd and he was shaded from the sun. That's the same word. But it's also used in a figurative sense as a protection from calamity. Well, we know this verse well, where this word is found. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall what? Abide under the shadow of the Almighty. And so both wisdom and wealth are described with this word. But notice at the end of verse 12, wisdom has an advantage. And we see it there in this phrase, giveth life. And it's the idea of keeping alive or preserving alive. Solomon says this about wisdom. She is a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her. And happy is everyone that retaineth her. He says, for whoso findeth me, speaking of wisdom, findeth life and shall obtain favor of the Lord. You see, truly, beloved, wisdom is better than wealth. Now, in adversity and calamity, in a difficult situation, is it good to have some wealth? Maybe it can protect us. You know, maybe you've got a big nest egg, but the truth is this, beloved. The wisdom of God is limitless. Romans tells us, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are His judgments and His ways past finding out. For who hath known the mind of the Lord? And what do we learn? Wealth runs out in adversity. Eventually, if that is our dependence, if that's the path we're going to take, beloved, our wealth can run out. Our substance can run out. But the wisdom of God is limitless. What does James tell us? If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. So how are you handling adversity? Are you seeking escape, or are you embracing our incredible God? How are you in the paths of wisdom? Do you have good godly counselors? Are you listening to them? Are you patiently walking with God, or are you letting emotion and pressure drive you to make unwise choices? Are you seeking the wisdom of God? Or are you depending upon your own strength or means to get you through? I would encourage you this morning, if life is weighing you down, let's look and evaluate. Who am I depending upon? What am I depending upon? Am I seeking escape, or am I embracing this incredible God that we're seeing here in the book of Ecclesiastes? Father, we thank you that you are a great and incredible God. Lord, we're reminded this morning as we look at these lessons from wisdom and these warnings even that come. Father, may we follow the path of wisdom. Lord, may we see the value of rebuke and adversity. Lord, may we see the value of patience, waiting upon you and walking with you through adversity, depending and clinging to you. Lord, even in the midst of our adversity, Father, may we depend fully on you, not on anything else. Lord, may this turn our hearts to you this morning. Lord, may this encourage us. And Lord, may we as the psalmist, even though we may be struggling in the midst of adversity, may we declare, hope thou in God. Because it is in you that we find our strength. So Father, this morning, we come with our hearts open before you. Lord, may we be obedient to your Spirit. Lord, those things that maybe we need to bring back and lay at your feet. Lord, those things that maybe we have been holding on to, hanging on to, trying to either escape or to make our circumstances work. Lord, may we come back to you, all-knowing, omnipotent God, the only one who can make crooked what has been made straight. May we declare our dependence upon you. Lord, bless as we take just these few moments of invitation. Lord, bless our response. Lord, may it reflect an obedient heart in Jesus' name. Stand together. Our heads are bowed.